Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee and today I want to discuss wargaming on a budget, making homemade terrain. So this subject follows on from a video I did a couple of weeks ago which asked, is wargaming expensive? And the general direction of that particular discussion was that like any hobby, it's as expensive as you make it. But as one of my commenters put, there's many different ways of parting a wargamer from his or her money, and that's absolutely true. But of course there are ways of keeping that hobby spending down, especially important if you're a wargamer on a budget, and most of us are at one time or another. Making your own terrain is probably one of the biggest ways you can save money by playing when playing your games, and it's a lot easier than you think. I mean, if I can do it, then certainly anybody can. I've got no particular skill set that makes me better at making terrain than anyone else, not by any stretch of the imagination. So if I can do it, anybody can. So what follows are 3 examples of types of terrain that I've got some experience of making, and why it's better than some of the commercial examples. Battlefields are rarely flat, so we all need hills for our games tables. And there's lots of commercial products available, everything from cheaper styrofoam hills that you can buy through to plastic and resin and MDF examples. And you know, a very good place to look for that sort of thing is eBay. And they usually come pre-painted and flocked, and therefore they're relatively expensive for what you get. But hills can be really cheap. Probably one of the cheapest things that you can put on your games table. So there's 3 main homemade examples that I have some experience of, so I wanted to discuss them here. The first off is cardboard. So really all you need is some sheets of corrugated cardboard, PVA, some paper to make some papier-mâché perhaps to cover it, and some MDF. You can also use some filler if you wish over the top. Now, corrugated cardboard, we get it all the time. I'm forever getting parcels turning up in it, and I often cut it up and keep chunks of it because I might find a use for it. It's very good because it's quite strong. It's very good for adding bulk to hills, and obviously it doesn't weigh a lot. However, it can warp a little bit when it dries out, particularly if you're going to put a cover in, a sort of papier-mâché or something like that over the top to give a smoother surface. So it's useful if you can mount it on an MDF base, if you like, so that it doesn't warp. But the results are dirt cheap. I mean, you're going to throw the cardboard in the recycling anyway. Bit of PVA, maybe a bit of filler, a small sheet of MDF, and you've got yourself a good hill, and you can make it to whatever shape you desire. Another example, and the one that I'm personally favouring at the moment, is XPS Foam. It's a high density foam. It's very resilient, a bit expensive, but a good product, and I've bought enough to keep me going for years for about 20 quid. Now you need a sharp knife to cut it. If you can get a foam cutter, brilliant, but you can still do it with a knife if you can't afford a foam cutter. A bit of sandpaper so that you can round off the edges, and then it's just PVA and your usual flocking materials. The result, hills are resilient, very lightweight, very easy to work with. And as I say, I bought a large pack, 10 sheets of 20mm thick XPS foam. They're A3 size, so they're quite large. You can make big hills or small hills. That cost me about 20 quid. And as I say, that will make me enough hills to last me ages, particularly for my regular size table. And then if you can't afford that, you can just go for the absolute cheapest option, finding some styrofoam from packing materials. Yeah, again, it's not as durable as XPS, but you know, when it's covered in perhaps a bit of filler to give the surface a bit of strength, again, very easy to cut and work with. It can be painted. Don't spray on it because it will dissolve it, as will the XPS foam. You need to put a water-based primer over the surface before you think about adding any sprays, if that's what you want to do. But very easy to work with, and of course it's packing materials are often stuff that you'd throw straight in the recycling bin, so you know, very low cost. Another type of terrain that is often very expensive but you can make yourself very easily are fields. Loads of commercial examples available. Sometimes they're made from silicone or they're hard resin. They're often pre-painted. you can find a lot of sort of handmade examples available on eBay. Certainly that's a good way of keeping the cost down. But there are homemade examples that I've got some experience of, and that I think are fairly easy to do if you've got a bit of space to do some work in. So one example that I've tried is silicone, a bathroom sealant or a bathroom cork that dries into what is in effect sort of like a plastic type material or rubbery material. It can be messy, as to be said, so you need a good clear work area, but the results are brilliant. I've got some examples that I've made that have lasted me for years and look really good. They're flexible, so they will fit over terrain. I found them to be very durable, and of course they can be painted usually with some acrylics and so on. Another example that you could try is thin sheets of MDF. Now I managed to buy a load of packs of 1mm MDF, again relatively cheap considering the commercial examples, and then cover them in filler to texture the surface. Now thin MDF can warp, so you need to make sure that you store it flat. And storage is a bit of an issue there. I've found, you've really got to be careful how you store it, because if they bend, then they're just going to look silly on the table, particularly as they're rigid, unlike a flexible silicone example. And of course, one of the downsides is once you make a field of a particular size, it stays that size. You can't do anything else with it. However, they can be painted, they can be flocked, and they look really good. Now the example, the type of material that I'm currently favouring and I'm finding to be really useful and quite applicable to the games that I want to play is using cloth. So I can buy myself some cheap offcuts of material online, or if I'm going around to market stalls, I found some the other week, some corduroy that was just perfect for something that I want to make. And so I've got ploughed fields made out of corduroy material. I've got felt for woods, fir to represent wheat fields. They're flexible, they can overlay hills, and they're even a little bit paintable. Because the material can be quite cheap, you can make fields of any size you want. You can cut them up. When you get to a game, you go, actually, I need it to be that shape, and you can cut it. Doesn't matter, it's cheap. I'm finding it to be my favourite material because it stores easily. You haven't got to worry about different MDF sheets sticking together or anything like that. It stores very nicely, and as I say, flexible. They look really good. So if anyone's seen some of my most recent World War II games, you can see some of my cloth fields in action. Now usually the most expensive terrain on the table is going to be buildings. They're resin or MDF, often come pre-painted, and it's particularly the MDF examples is a great way of getting a lot of terrain on the table very quickly. But that can be quite expensive. It can add up to quite a bit of money if you're going to go down that route. Great if you can afford it, but if you can't, there are some homemade examples. So I've made buildings using foam board. Again, you just need a sharp knife and PVA to be able to use this material. It usually comes in thin, lightweight sheets. You can shop around for some cheap examples. Again, I went shopping a few weeks ago and I found a pack of foam board sheets that was in a bargain bin, half the price that I would have got if I'd have bought it online. Now I've used it in different ways. You can use it as is and just paint the outside. You can cover it in diluted filler to sort of give a bit of texture to the walls. A very versatile material, which is why it's used by architects to make models and things like that. Another material is the XPS Foam, similar to what I've been using for my heels, but in thinner sheets. Really good. I found it to be really good for making larger buildings for 28mm games. Similar tools as before. You need a sharp knife, a bit of PVA. It's great for masonry and large structures. And an XPS foam, it can be sanded, it can be textured, it can be painted. Lightweight, very strong, and if you're going to make multiple buildings, it can be quite a cheap way of getting some really good quality terrain on your table with minimal skills. And then card. It's less strong, obviously, than some of the other materials, but in a way similar to the foam board, in that it can be cut with a sharp knife and stuck with PVA glue. Obviously it has less resilience, and you've got to be very careful how you store it, but it can be cheap as chips. I mean, finding craft card in bargain bins, you know, it costs next to nothing. You know, and if you want something a little bit more resilient, go back to the corrugated cardboard that you get your Amazon parcels in. Keep that, cut it up, make the core of a building, and then add some filler and so on the outside to give it a bit of texture. You know, you can make some very cheap buildings from materials that would otherwise get thrown away. So they're just 3 examples of the sorts of terrain that I've made for relatively little money. But there's loads of terrain making tutorials on YouTube. You know, obviously you're on YouTube watching this video, so you probably already know this, but definitely make full use of those sort of terrain videos, because there's a load of brilliant examples out there. And also there's a load of really good terrain making books and guides that are available. Lots of advice on blogs. Don't be afraid to ask for ideas, and you know, go out there and nick the best ideas for yourself. Making terrain can be a very fun pursuit in its own right, and it's a very cost-effective way of building up terrain on a table. And customised terrain can be made for your specific needs. You know, you need a building of a particular shape, or a hill that does a particular feature in a game. You can make it yourself relatively cheaply. There's no compromises when you're making your own terrain, because you can make it to your own specification. And it's a great way for the newbie and the veteran alike to get terrain on the table, particularly if you're starting a new project and you need a load of new terrain, perhaps a different scale or for a different period. And as I say, it's a darn sight cheaper than many of the commercial examples, so something that you should always bear in mind, I think. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found that interesting. Maybe start a bit of a conversation in the comments below. And of course, as always, if you did enjoy it, please like, subscribe and click the bell notification icon to hear of new videos as they come out. So until next week, keep safe, get as many games in as you can, and keep rolling high.